So let's try to work this out from the Reserve Bank's point of view. Peter Tulip is the Chief Economist of the Centre for Independent Studies and previously worked at the Reserve Bank and also the US Federal Reserve. He's been critical of the Reserve Bank for its culture and its economic forecasting and was one of those who pushed for a significant review into the Reserve Bank's role, something that's currently underway. Peter, thanks for your time. First things first, why would the Reserve Bank right now want to send a signal that it's softening its interest rate rise program? Why now?
That's a really good question, Ross. And it's not really clear, and I personally don't agree with the softening. But the argument they give is that they've already done a substantial amount, and so it's time to ease their foot off the accelerator. So they're not putting on the brakes, but they're not pushing it as hard as they can because they think they've already done a lot.
OK, so I want to go specifically here because it was one of your issues. Again, part of what makes up the review of the Reserve Bank right now on the track record of the Reserve Bank's forecasting and indeed its interest rate settings. That's what this is all about, because the Reserve Bank has been proven wrong in the past with its forecasting. So we're having to rely now on the Reserve Bank, having got this forecast of taking its foot off the pedal, that they're right about this forecast.
Yes, and that's always going to be a big problem with monetary policy. You have to look at where the economy is going, particularly after you've done a major change in interest rates. It's going to take quite some time before that starts showing through in the economic data. You can't wait till after it's showed up. You'll be responding too late. You have to make a forecast, and you're quite right. Their forecasts have just been dreadful. But you don't have any alternative.
No, that's true, because you've got to make a line call on this. But one of the other criticisms of the Reserve Bank that you have had is that the interest rate decisions, certainly they do come from the Reserve Bank staff, but it's also left with a board that has broad industry perspective and not the monetary policy perspective that you would hope that would come. They might take a real view life attitude that, well, business needs a bit of a break here. We don't want to go too hard because we'll frighten the property markets, whatever it might be that they make that decision about. That's not the hard-headed, economist view that you've got to crush inflation.
That's exactly right, Ross. And I've argued that this is an ongoing problem with the Reserve Bank and they need more monetary policy experts on the board. A big question that the central bank in Australia and all around the world is facing now is, how quickly do you tighten? When do you need to tighten? Do you do it gradually, the way the Reserve Bank is doing, or a cold turkey approach? There's a large economic literature on that subject. Experts have thoroughly examined that question, but this current board isn't really capable to form a judgment on that research.
OK, so go back to that research. What does that research tell us?
So people disagree.
Right.
So maybe it's not that reliable. In my view, it says the bank should be moving quicker. The central banks tend to move very gradually, and it's difficult to find good reasons for that gradualism. A lot of it seems to just be a fear of action, a fear of scaring the markets. But the cost is they end up moving too slowly and have to do more than they would otherwise need to do. OK,
so then I want to go back to some of the conversations that the Governor, Philip Lowe, has had, where he admits that the image of the Reserve Bank has taken a dent as a result of some of their poor forecasting, in particular saying that rates wouldn't move until 2024. It shows that they are conscious of the Reserve Bank's image right now in the public's eyes. The public have got to have confidence in the settings of the Reserve Bank. But the problem is you can't have your image overriding good policy. And just what I'm wondering here is whether we're seeing a little bit of image making or whether we're seeing pure good policy.
That's a great question. And you would have more confidence that we are seeing good policy if the bank clearly explained its reasons. But it hasn't done that. So the statement this week, it was fairly vague on why it surprised the markets. Most people were expecting to do 50 basis points. They did 25 basis points instead. It would have been great to say why they chose that, a different course of action to what everyone else was expecting. But other than them saying, oh, we've already done a lot, There was very little in the way of argument or explanation.
So that's another criticism of the Reserve Bank that may well come up in the review, and that is that the debate between the Reserve Bank board members and where that debate goes, which is more of what the US Federal Reserve does, which is to a certain extent what even the Reserve Bank of New Zealand does. It shows you some of the context of the debate. Yep. That seems to be missing from Australia's Reserve Bank.
Yes. So we see a little bit of that every quarter in the Statement on Monetary Policy, but that's not the prime purpose of that document. It's much more a summary of economic conditions, and you have to wade through 60 pages of mud before you get the paragraph explaining policy. It's not an effective explanation.
In the Friday statement that came out into the financial stability statement, that also indicates that it believes that there will be pockets of hardship for some who have perhaps overborrowed or maybe lose a job or change in circumstances, whatever it might be. Probably those who are late into the property market are most vulnerable, you'd say. But some of those people who have been late into the property market, late borrowing large amounts of money, are also the very same people who might have been under the impression that rates weren't going to move higher until 2024. So you see, this is now being said, but then there's a thing saying, well, we're actually not responsible for that.
Well, no, they clearly are responsible. But it's an understandable criticism that's being made. I don't have much sympathy or respect for those critics. If anyone did want certainty, they were free to fix their interest rate, which millions of borrowers actually did do.
And I think it was almost 40% of borrowers.
Yes, yeah, including me.
Yeah.
But also, to be fair to the Reserve Bank, their expectation for the outlook and for interest rates was always a conditional one.
Yes.
It depended on how the economy would evolve and the inflation picture. And that changed very dramatically. So, consistent with what they said, those earlier expectations no longer applied. I think it's an unfair criticism that the bank's been getting on this score.
There you go. So on many cases, you are critical of the Reserve Bank, but on this one, you cut them a bit of slack. Peter Tulip,
That's right.
Always good to have you in the program from the Centre for Independent Studies. Many thanks for your time today.